All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joseph Houston, and as the director of the Lewiston Public Library, I would like to welcome you all to the Great Falls Forum. The Forum is a monthly speaker series featuring leaders in the area of business, public policy, academia, and the arts, and is a partnership of Bates College, the Sun Journal, and the Lewiston Public Library. This year marks the 27th season of Great Falls Forum. We thank you for your support and ensuring the program's continued success. Today's program is also streaming live via Zoom, and a recording will be available on the library's YouTube page. Please visit lplonline.org for more information. Please mark your calendars for our next season of Great Falls Forum, returning on September 18th. At the conclusion of today's program, there will be an opportunity for audience questions. Those in the room are welcome to raise their hands, and those joining us virtually can enter their questions using the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll read these to our speaker. And now I have the pleasure of introducing today's featured speaker, Hannah Pingree. Hannah Pingree was appointed as Director of Governor Mills' Office of Policy Innovation and the Future in 2019. As director, Hannah leads cross-agency efforts to develop innovative policy solutions that address pressing long-term challenges for Maine, such as climate change, energy, housing, workforce and economic development, coordinating federal infrastructure investments, and supporting children and older Maine people. She was also appointed by Governor Mills in 2019 to co-chair the Maine Climate Council, which leads climate planning for the state. Hannah served 4 terms in the Maine legislature from 2003 to 2010 and served as both Speaker of the House of Representatives and House Majority Leader. Please join me in welcoming Hannah to Lewiston.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you to Joseph. I was talking to him before. Joseph, if you don't know this, he moved to Maine from Indiana 2 years ago because he wanted to be in a state that respects libraries and respects librarians. So I just would say we're very happy to have you. I'm glad you live in Maine. And if you didn't know this, the Lewiston Public Library is doing a capital campaign for their children's library. So I'm putting in a plug. So it's great to be in this room. I really appreciate the mayor being here. Tony Ronzio, who used to be on my staff and now works for Governor Mills, is in the room. And I will say, since I've been in Lewiston this morning, I've run into 3 people who I served in the Maine legislature with, and 2 of them are in this room. So thank you for coming, Mike Carey and Margaret Craven. I saw Brian Cainrath, your new city manager, at Forage Bagel this morning. So you have an awesome city with amazing elected officials and former elected officials. So it is great to be in this room. I'm going to talk today a little bit about the work of the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future. I will say that Senator Peggy Rotundo asked me to do this like 6 months ago. And Joseph asked me a couple weeks ago, he's like, do you remember you're doing this thing? And I'm like, yes, what do you want me to talk about? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the creation of this office, how I got to it. I'm going to talk a lot about climate and how we prepare Maine for storms, since this has been a major focus of our work. But I'm going to try to wrap it up and take your questions on any topic relating to the work that we've been doing. So just a little bit more about me. I will just say that I got into politics at the age of 24. I looked like a high school student in this photo. I started running for the Maine legislature. I will say, I think Mike Carey started a few years after me. We were both children at the time, but we were young people who wanted to make a difference and felt like we could contribute to the state. And I spent 8 years in the Maine legislature, and I learned a ton about our entire state, about how you can make a difference in policy and in government. During my time in the Maine legislature, I spent 2 years as the majority leader, and then 2 years as, just tech guys fixing things, and then 2 years as the Maine speaker. And I will just say that I think I feel very lucky for how much people in government care about their citizens. We live in a state in which members of the Maine House have districts of only about 10,000 people. And to get elected, we go out and knock on doors. I mean, how many people in this room have had an elected official knock on their door? A lot of you. Great. And if you've knocked on a door, raise your hand. Hopefully Margaret, you've knocked on some doors, right? Yes, many. Good. I think we're really lucky. And I would say, as I transitioned to work, I did serve with Governor Mills in the Maine legislature for 6 years. And then she became our attorney general. She was a very opinionated and smart. And I would say, I know that both Margaret and Mike would agree with me. She was a hardworking member of the Maine legislature, and she became our attorney general. I think you all know lots about her. So in 2018, when she was elected to be governor, she asked me if I would serve on her transition team and figure out, okay, how am I going to put together a government? How am I going to pick good commissioners? How do we make sure we deliver on all the things that I campaigned on? So she asked me if I would, when she was out campaigning, she started talking about this idea of the future. Kurt Vonnegut had a quote that said, every government ought to have a department of the future. And she said, do you want to run this department, Hannah? And I was like, sure, Governor. What do you want me to do? She's like, just go work on the long-term challenges that face Maine. I've talked a lot about children. I've talked about climate. The former governor didn't really want to talk about climate change. So just go out and do what you need to do. She hired me, and then she also hired Gordon Smith, who is the director of Maine's opioid response. And we were the first two employees of this governor's office of policy, innovation, in the future. We call it GOPIF for short. And our challenge was really, how do we plan for the long-term challenges that Maine faces? And then how do we not just plan for it, but actually start to implement the kind of policy that will make a difference? So since 2019, we've had, I think, a growing and broad portfolio of issues. We've done a lot, and I'm going to talk a fair amount about climate and infrastructure, which really got going after the severe storms of just a couple of years ago. The governor, when she took office, wanted to revive the Children's Cabinet, which had been started under Governor King and had been dormant for about 8 years. So we brought back this kind of approach, thinking about kids across agencies and with lots of stakeholders. About halfway through her term, she said, we need to be doing the same thing for Maine's aging population. So she started a cabinet on aging, which we manage. The legislature did a very, I would say, impressive plan to try to end hunger by 2030. And they have assigned our office the responsibility of working with folks all over the state to think about how do we address food insecurity. We got very engaged in housing policy, and I will talk a little bit more about that, but it's obviously no secret that housing is at a crisis level for many people in Maine. So we started to really dig into housing policy about halfway through the governor's time in office. Engaging our workforce in good paying jobs, making sure we have enough people to do those jobs was a major part of our work, and we really got engaged in economic recovery coming out of the pandemic. One of our most recent projects is we just launched the Office of New Americans. So starting, especially during the pandemic period where we started to see a larger number of asylum seekers in Maine, we knew the state needed to do a better job thinking about how to get people into work, how to help them navigate the systems of job training and credentialing and getting work permits. So we just now this year have started the Office of New Americans. And I already mentioned our work on opioids. So I'll just say, I think big picture, I think we have navigated the last 6.5 years, and I would say this is where I think we are. We are living in very complicated times. Our state is seeing growth and change. We are seeing incredible change when it comes to our climate, but we're seeing the pace of change accelerating on issues like housing and workforce and economic opportunity. There is really a need to dig in and do more. I think the governor's approach all along has been that we need more thoughtful and deliberate planning, but we also need action. But we need to make sure that we don't do those things in a silo in Augusta. And a lot of the focus of our work since 2019 is to make sure that we're not just doing it among state agencies and commissioners, but we are actually going out and talking to communities. And a lot of our work has been in partnership with municipal leaders, with the tribes, with young people, with businesses, with all the groups who have a stake in what we are doing as a state. And I would just say, a couple things that I think I've learned. These are actually pictures from my home community. I live on an offshore island off of Rockland. These are a couple pictures of my town, but there are sort of a couple of key factors that are driving our change and growth, but things that we just know that we absolutely need. And one of them is absolutely housing. Housing has kind of become this primary issue that is impacting so much of our economic prosperity. It's impacting people's pocketbooks. It's impacting whether young people can stay in the community they live in, especially in parts of our state that are more expensive. I'll just compliment Lewiston, and Lewiston city leadership is doing a good job on this issue, trying to get more housing. But housing is absolutely fundamental. We also know, this is another picture of my home community, that our communities are facing rapid change when it comes to climate. This is a picture after the January storms of 2024, obviously causing really havoc to our communities. This is a stat that somebody's coming in with delicious snacks. No problem. I just hope he's going to share. He's got boxes there. I think that you probably are aware of some of the other factors that are really impacting Maine right now. As you probably know, Maine is still the oldest state in the nation. Our population, our demographic challenge is impacting the way in which we try to staff our hospital systems and our schools. It's impacting how companies grow, and it is obviously causing costs to go up as well. During the pandemic, we started to see a little bit of a shift, though. More people are starting to move to Maine. That's probably driving some of our housing challenges, but we have more young people moving to Maine. We have more young people staying in Maine. We have in-migration from people both coming from other parts of the country, but also coming from other parts of the world. And again, going back to that last one, we do need people to help fulfill our workforce. So this population growth is a positive. We, for a long time, have been a state that's seen young people move away. So to start to see a positive movement in our state's population growing, especially younger populations, it is good for the future of our state. But again, it has created challenges. One of the big projects our office has been working on over the last couple of years to try to both quantify the housing challenge and then figure out solutions. And we did a report with Maine Housing just a couple of years ago that basically told us that we were nearly 40,000 units below what we needed for our current population to have stable housing, especially our workforce, and that by 2030, we needed at least another 40,000 units to meet especially the growing workforce demand as people retire. So 80,000 housing units is a lot, but it is it's not to sort of get some huge group of new people to move to Maine. It is just to help our young people have places to live and ensure that we can replace people in our workforce who are retiring. So huge challenge, but a hugely fundamental one for our future. So this is something, hopefully you all know some of the things I'm going to tell you about climate change, but we are already seeing impacts from climate change in our state. Warmer temperatures, precipitation, shorter winters, rising sea levels. And we know that that is causing the more extreme storm events that we've experienced, especially over the course of the last couple of years. Maine right now has, I think, 9 open federal disasters with FEMA, more than ever before in our state's history. And you've heard about a couple of the big ones. We had the huge one in December of 2023, 2 in a row in January, but other extreme ones that, hit the town of Maine have hit other communities in a very targeted way and caused huge infrastructure damage. And they've caused, I know in Lewiston felt this, extreme river flooding came from those storm events. This is a damaged roadway in Newry, Maine. So it's causing huge expense for taxpayers when these huge events hit and our infrastructure is not prepared for these impacts. This is a business that was being developed in downtown Skowhegan, the spinning mill. This is what happened after those December storm events, huge damage to a housing project that was underway. So we know that this is something that we need to proactively deal with. After those storm events, the legislature appropriated $60 million to help us recover. But we knew that was sort of only the beginning of what we needed to do to kind of prepare for this new future that was a much more uncertain climate. The governor, after those storm events, launched a infrastructure rebuilding and resilience commission. So how do we better prepare for these storm events? We knew that during those December and January storms that people weren't always getting accurate information. Some people were stranded in their homes. We had up to 5 days of power outages, which really was damaging for people who were stuck in their homes and didn't have access to food or electricity. So we needed to do a better job of emergency management, but we also need to do a better job of avoiding those kind of impacts in the future. So this commission had met for about a year. They actually just finished their work last week, and they came up with a number of recommendations about how we improve storm response, how we cement the foundation for resilience long term, and how do we make sure that we're doing this in every part of our infrastructure, from our electricity grid to our transportation to our communication systems. I will tell you that we love this kind of number, the sort of common sense Mainer thing of like, why does it make sense to invest in these things? So the US Chamber of Commerce did a study last year that said for every $1 invested in resilience, we saved $13. So think of that crumbling roadway in Newry that we have to rebuild. If we have bigger culverts that will prevent that road from being destroyed, we won't have to spend millions of dollars to rebuild it every time we have an extreme storm. So we're trying to think about, how does the state of Maine make those kind of investments in the long term? How do we pay for it? How do we make sure our taxpayers can spend that $1 investing in resilience so we don't have these huge losses down the road? So again, just last week, we introduced the first plan for Maine's infrastructure resilience. So really trying to take a long-term approach about how we better prepare for these storm events. I will also say, out of the work of this commission, the legislature acted, and they acted early in their session and in a bipartisan way. So you've probably been reading the news. It's definitely controversial right now in Augusta. And when you can get people on both sides of the aisle to get together and agree on something, that is actually kind of a big deal. So we got leaders from both sides of the aisle in the House and the Senate to sponsor the governor's bill, LD1, an act to increase storm preparedness for Maine's communities, homes, and infrastructure. And the bill makes huge investments in a program to help homeowners better prepare their homes. It will help people strengthen their roofs, avoid basement flooding. So if you have these issues in your home, this program will probably roll out later this year from the Bureau of Insurance. So we started this new program. We invest more money in emergency management just to recover from the storms we have, but to better communicate during future ones. And last, but maybe most importantly, we create a new state resilience office in the Flood Ready Maine initiative. We know that lots of towns have old, out-of-date FEMA maps. They don't really know where it's going to flood. Maybe they anecdotally know it's been flooding more there, but they don't really have the information they need to better prepare. So the state is trying to step up, especially without as much funding coming from the federal government, and think about how we can help our communities be ready. So I'm going to talk a little bit shifting. I mean, this is a similar theme, but the governor, again, when she took office, she said she was going to be a leader in climate action. She wanted our state to both prepare for storms, but also do our part globally to reduce emissions, to try to reduce the worst impacts in the future. She passed, actually, again, I would say an overwhelmingly bipartisan law in 2019. I think a lot of people talk about climate change and they think it's very partisan. Well, in the Maine legislature, a Republican Senator, David Woodson, sponsored this bill to create the Maine Climate Council, to put emission reduction targets in law to require us to better prepare for climate. And the vast majority of the Maine legislature agreed that this was a good idea. The Climate Council is required to put out a climate action plan every 4 years. It is required to reduce our emissions 45% by 2030 and at least 80% by 2050. This is to kind of do our part globally to try to slow emissions, to slow the impacts of climate change, and then to do what it can to ensure that Maine people, industries, and communities are resilient. So the Maine Climate Council, again, is not just a couple of us in Augusta coming up with some wonky ideas. It is hundreds of people across the state who are participating in 6 working groups and 2 subcommittees on specific topics. We have a science group who's telling us the actual facts of what's happening on the ground. We have an equity subcommittee focused on how do we ensure that the kinds of programs we're passing actually benefit low-income communities. And again, we have experts from business, young people, communities, talking about buildings, transportation, energy, communities, the coast, natural and working lands. And so the Climate Council came out with their first plan in 2020. We just released another one just this past November, and it has 4 main goals. 1, to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to meet the targets in law. 2, to make Maine more resilient to the impacts of climate change. 3, to foster economic opportunity. We know that our transition to clean energy and preparing is good for our economy. We know that we can create good paying jobs, whether it's timber HP in Madison producing insulation out of wood products, or lots of small businesses who are installing heat pumps. We are creating jobs in Maine. And again, to advance equity through Maine's response. So where does our emissions actually come from? Hopefully some of you have seen this slide before, but about 50% come from our transportation sector, 30% from our buildings, 10% from our industries, and just 9% from electric power. So this is sort of the basis of which this big requirement to reduce our emissions is coming from. So as a state, we have this goal to reduce it by 45% by 2030. The good news is, compared to a lot of other states, we are actually making good progress. We are 30% lower than our baseline of 1990, but we still have another 15% to go in just 5 years. So I'm not going to get into deep detail, but we have 7 strategies to try to tackle the goals that are required in law. And the first is about the future of transportation. So again, half of our emissions come from transportation. So this is a big area in which we need to do a whole lot of heavy lifting. You've probably heard a lot about the electrification. So electrification is one area of focus. And it doesn't just mean electric vehicles. It can mean plug-in hybrids. It means more efficient vehicles. That's how we can reduce our emissions in transportation. But another major and important area is public transportation and land use. If we don't have to drive as far to work or go to school, if we can plan more housing near workplaces and school, we can reduce our emissions significantly, especially as our state grows. Modernizing Maine's buildings. This is one I think that Maine people love, they rally around. We are leading the country in heat pump deployment. We believe in weatherization. So making Maine's buildings more energy efficient is a win-win. We have among the oldest housing stock in the country. And we know that if we are building a new building, we should be building it in a more energy efficient way. We're trying to help people wean themselves off fossil fuel, which is one of the most expensive ways to heat your home. So major area to both reduce emissions and honestly make people more comfortable in their homes and save them money. All of this work, especially as we transition to heat pumps, which run on electricity, electric vehicles, it does require clean energy. So the governor in law right now is an 80% requirement for renewable energy by 2030. The governor set a goal of 100% by 2040. And the way we look at this is right now we are buying over $4 billion a year in fossil fuels from somewhere else. It's coming from other countries. It's coming from other parts of this country. So if we can produce clean energy in Maine, made by Maine people, that's a win for our economy. Obviously, we need to do it in an affordable way. We need to make sure our grid is ready. But this transition is significant to the whole climate plan working. So Maine, as many of you know, is a 90% forested state. We are doing a major service in sequestering carbon with our forests, with our farms, with our salt marshes. So our ability to protect Maine's environment for lots of reasons that are good for our economy and good for our people is important, but it's also very important to our climate plan. Again, you saw the pictures of the storm devastation. How we build healthy and resilient communities that are ready for this change is a major focus of our work. We spent a lot of time focusing on how to help cities and towns do this work. I'll talk a little bit more about a program that we have underway, but healthy and resilient communities is essential. And last but not least, again, we don't just do these plans for ourselves. We want to make sure that Maine people understand the opportunities. We have tremendous rebates right now, for example, to install a heat pump, to weatherize your home. The federal government has opportunities to help you buy an electric vehicle. So we want to make sure that all Maine people understand these opportunities, especially when they can save you money. So we've produced 2 climate plans for the state. Every year we put out where are we? How are we doing? We put out a dashboard of progress because we want to be accountable. We set these big goals in law. We want people to know exactly how we're doing. So for example, we set a goal to install 100,000 heat pumps in 2019. We exceeded that goal 2 years early, and the governor's now set a more ambitious goal. We're trying to weatherize as many homes as we can. This is pretty difficult work. It takes contractors a fair amount of time to really tighten up your house, but we are making progress. We're trying to make sure that more of those homes are low income for both heat pumps and weatherization. There's lots of other different goals, and I won't get into each of them, but they're all important, and they're important, again, to be accountable. The governor set a goal to create 30,000 clean energy jobs by 2030. We are already halfway there. We have a long ways to go, but again, these are jobs that pay above average wages. So I've already bragged a little bit about heat pumps, how we've exceeded our goal, and we've set another goal for 40,000 of those heat pumps to be in low-income households by 2030. Again, we know that weatherization is saving money and improving the comfort and health of people's homes. A big part of our work around housing and the climate plan is how we actually bring it together with things like our affordable housing goals. So we set a goal in our most recent climate plan to build or renovate at least 1,500 energy efficient affordable housing units per year. So again, the climate plan isn't kind of working in this silo just on climate, but we are also contributing to our affordable housing goals. The climate plan has a goal to increase the amount of food consumed coming from Maine farms to 30% by 2030. Again, we know this is good for farmers, but it is also good for the climate. We've set a goal to do more to support farming, fishing, and forestry. These are industries that are on the front lines of climate change. They are rapidly changing. They are dealing with warmer oceans, increasing rain events. They are dealing with lots of new pests in the forests. They are kind of our essential heritage industries in our state that have driven our economy for a long time. And we want them to be successful, but we also want to help them adapt in this changing period. We're also trying to really ramp up to do a lot more to help people access these services. One of our goals coming out of the climate plan is to actually support an energy coaching program. We know that with all of these federal rebates, with all of these opportunities to improve your home, they are complicated to navigate. So we're trying to help more and more Maine people really with it, like, how does your furnace work? How can we tune it up? How can we save you oil? How can we insulate your basement? So I want to just kind of give you the impression of action, because I will just say, again, this climate plan is really about taking action. Because of both federal funding and state funding, we've invested over $600 million since 2019 in resilience for Maine's communities. We've also engaged over 1,000 young people who really care about this climate issue in our climate plan. We launched a program. There are not a lot of young people in this room, but I'm sure you all know young people, called Climate and Me, to ensure that young people understand the opportunities to take action on climate. If you're interested in reading more about our climate plan, go to maine.gov/climate plan. We have how-to guides of things you can do for your home, your vehicle, your business, and your community. One of the most exciting programs we've launched in the last couple of years, we launched in 2021, is called the Community Resilience Partnership. And I will tell you that Lewiston is a member, Auburn is a member, 263 towns in Maine are now participating in this program, 53% of all towns in Maine. This is a program of communities who want to do something to help contribute to the state's climate plan. They want to reduce emissions. They want to plan for increasing storm events. They want to find a way to save money in their town hall, whatever it is. We give out grants to help communities do what they want. Most of these towns are being run by volunteer committees who care about this issue. And then they work with their town leadership or their city leadership. And what town would say no to a $50,000 to $75,000 grant to make a difference? One of the other things we've been doing that is related to both climate but sort of broader planning is we've proposed and now created a new Maine Office of Community Affairs. So when Governor LePage was in office, we used to have a state planning office. That office sort of helped with policy development, but really helped as a one-stop shop for communities who are trying to figure out how to make a difference. That office was eliminated in 2020. And so Governor Mills, eliminated back in 2012. And so Governor Mills wanted to bring that office back. So we recreated the state planning office and called it the Maine Office of Community Affairs, because we know that municipal leaders, tribal leaders are dealing with a lot of challenges and they need more support. Again, they're dealing with housing issues, climate issues, and they honestly are having difficulty dealing with such complex systems. So the governor this past year named Samantha Horn as the first director of the Maine Office of Community Affairs. She has hit the ground running, offering grant programs to communities. The state budget is currently kind of implicating how to move a number of different programs in state government into this new office. But again, we're really excited about the ability to better support towns and local leaders in the kinds of issues they face. One of those major issues, again, I've mentioned, is housing. So we did this report a couple of years ago. We identified the need for 80,000 housing units, and absolutely, a significant number. And we've said this is crucial, but we knew that more than just saying we needed to do more, and we are funding many programs to develop more housing, we needed to provide the legislature with more policy tools about how do we actually increase housing production to meet the need for the state of Maine. If you want to read, there's actually like 50 different recommendations about how we do it. But a lot of them are about just sort of challenges that people are facing on the ground, whether they're housing developers or municipal or city leaders dealing with the process for building housing. How do we build capacity for planning for housing? Again, your city of Lewiston is doing a fantastic job, but we know we need to do more. We know we need to do more to incentivize production, both on the affordable side, but also on the side of private developers who want to build housing that is attainable for more Maine people. We're trying to do a better job tracking how are we doing on this huge 80,000 housing goal. And last but not least, we're trying to strengthen the private sector. We know that there are not enough people in construction ready to build housing. There are huge workforce challenges. We know we could do a better job building materials for buildings like hopefully you've heard of cross-laminated timber, a huge opportunity to both use our wood products and build more energy efficient homes. So we're trying to do everything possible, sort of with all the different levers we have in state government to increase the pace of housing production. So just want to lastly talk about the Office of New Americans. The governor signed an executive order a couple of years ago asking our office to go out and talk to people about the challenges that communities and immigrants were facing in terms of integrating immigrants into our workforce and communities. I will say that despite sometimes the politics of this issue, we heard from hundreds of people across our state, including people in Lewiston and Auburn, about just the contributions of immigrants to our workforce, and also the dire need for more workers, whether it's in our schools or our businesses. And there was, I would say, again, this has been a little partisan at time, but bipartisan support for creating this new office. Maine is now, I think we have 20 different Office of New Americans around the country. They are in red states and blue states. And I think we all agree that all of our states need more workers. How do we help people who have arrived here who want to work get to work? How do we help people better integrate into our communities? So this office is a small office right now. It was authorized by the legislature. We have just a couple of people working at a high level, thinking about issues like English language acquisition. How do we help with credentialing? How do we help people start small businesses and navigate our small business development system? But I would just say we've had huge and overwhelming support for this office, again, including from the city of Lewiston. So I'm just going to end, and I will talk. Happy to take any questions. This is a picture of me just a couple of weeks ago with my two children who just recently have surpassed me in height. They used to be shorter than me. They're both in middle school. They're in 7th and 8th grade. And I will just say that the issues that my office works on are about planning for our future. We are dealing right now, I would say, with a lot of challenges in our politics. I think, as many of you know, our governor has been in a high profile back and forth with our president. But I feel very hopeful about our state. I think I've talked about some of the challenges, but I think we have bipartisan support for solving those issues. People want to live in Maine. We know we live in one of the most beautiful, one of the most safest, and I think one of the most beautiful environment states in the country. I think it is a state worth investing in. And that's why, for the sake of my kids and the sake of, I know, your kids and grandkids, I think the work that we are doing is important, and we want to continue. So I'm happy to take any questions on any topic. I've talked a lot about climate and storms, and I'm happy to talk about some of the other work of our office. And again, thank you to Lewiston Public Library for having me here today.
And I You have a microphone and I'll be coming around with that. So raise your hand if you have a question.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm at a table of Bates College related people. And so I want to ask
Hello, Bates.
a Bates connected question, which is not really about Bates College, but I'm wondering how is your office's work connecting with the other offices and initiatives that have long predated you? So for example, this fall, we have an economics class at Bates that's going to partner with the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development to do research into technology solutions to how to build faster. So just looking at what's working in other communities around the country and serving all of that up, having benchmarked it against the possibilities in Maine and then making recommendations. So that sounds very aligned with what you're doing. So I'm just wondering, like, are you guys in conversation or, you know, so just
No,
curious about the
it's a great
interconnection.
question. And I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. The work of our office is honestly when the governor created this Office of Policy Innovation in the Future, it was about looking to the future, but making sure that state government was not working in silos. Every project I talked about, some of them, you know, are sort of things that we spearhead, are about bringing all the agencies of state government together to solve problems. So the Children's Cabinet is about DHHS and Department of Education and Department of Labor, all thinking about how do we better serve kids. Our work on housing has actually been very integrated with DECD, Department of Economic and Community Development, thinking about how do we increase the pace of housing production and create good paying jobs. So the work that you are doing is probably very aligned with exactly the work that our team has been working on. So there's nothing that we do alone. We are always working in partnership with other state agencies, with communities, with state legislators, because again, this is not, we didn't want to be a group of policy wonks sort of saying like, well, we have an idea to fix housing and we have an idea to fix climate and we'll put out a report and good luck with that. This has really been an office, and all of the plans we do are, okay, how do we work with the Department of Transportation and DEP to rebuild our infrastructure? How are we going to permit that infrastructure? Okay, IF&W is in charge of, you know, stream crossings and fish passage. Well, they need to be at the table too. And then municipal leaders really care about this issue. How do we bring them in? So I will just say that really that is the crux of our work, making sure that government does not work in silos. Because when government's working in silos, it's probably reinventing a wheel or wasting time. So just Bates is doing so many good things. I've actually worked with them on a lot of climate and energy issues. So thank you for what you're doing on housing, and hopefully some of your students will get involved in our work in the next couple of years.
Hi, my name is Jim Parakilis. I want to thank you for the work you're doing. It seems to me it's both visionary and comprehensive, and it's exactly what we need. My question is about climate and the federal level. I work with the Maine People's Alliance, with a group that lobbies the federal delegation. I think we're very lucky in Maine that all the members of our delegation understand the issue of climate change. They're not deniers. Obviously, Representative Pingree and Senator King are tremendous supporters of what needs to be done on climate. Representative Golden and Senator Collins do not always vote the way their thinking indicates they should. So my question to you is, how do we work on them? How do we point out to them what are the crucial changes? I mean, you had wonderful examples here of changes that have already happened that are disastrous. And what are the ones that you think will speak to them?
I think that's a great question. And I mean, again, I can't perfectly tell you how to convince anybody of anything. I mean, I would say we are concerned about what's happening at the federal level. We've obviously had a major shift from a president who believed in climate change, past some of the most significant and landmark climate law and infrastructure investment law. And now many of those policies, investments are being debated at the federal level. Some of them have been taken away illegally, and we've actually gone through the court systems to get them back. And I will actually say our delegation, in a bipartisan way, all four of them, has been supportive of trying to help us keep NOAA funds to invest in climate resilience. They've been huge supporters of some of the forest products we've worked, that sort of climate smart work. So I think there's kind of a continued bipartisan nature, as you've suggested, among all four members of our delegation. But there's some big things coming up. I will say in the upcoming bill, there's a question about repealing a lot of the clean energy tax credits, which help states. Some of these tax credits actually help businesses and schools invest in energy efficiency and clean energy. I just think, appealing to the common sense nature of clean energy, we're buying fossil fuels from other states and countries, or we are trying to generate it here in Maine in a way that creates good paying jobs. I mean, that should be an economic argument that should work. I will say these big storm events, I think, have been pretty significant for our state. Again, I showed you pictures of our boatyard in my town where, everything was littered. A 250-year-old boatyard saw the highest tides and storm surge, in our state's history, as did most of our coast. The whole boatyard almost lifted away. After those storms, my whole community sort of went down to help the boatyard try to clean up and figure out how to rebuild. And I think a couple of my neighbors were underneath the boatyard, actually picking up tools that had fallen in the mud. And a friend of mine who helps run that boatyard was sort of talking to somebody else, and he said, "Well, I don't really think this had anything to do with climate change." And she said to him, "What's wrong? Are you an idiot? Like, of course this is climate change. This boatyard's been here for 250 years. We've never seen anything like this." And I think I think these storm events have caused people, again, fishermen, farmers, everyone is like, you cannot deny what is happening. So I think the storm events are a really important thing to continue to bring up and help connect them to what we need to do on climate, including keeping things like the IRA tax credit provisions. I'm hopeful our delegation, I mean, there's a lot of bad things being debated about cuts to healthcare, cuts to food programs, cuts to climate programs. So I'm hoping that all four of them will eventually stand up to a really bad budget that just delivers, huge tax cuts to billionaires. I think that's what we hope comes about. But I think just sort of talking about the impacts on the very core industries and the communities that we all have, I'm hopeful that they'll all vote no. So I appreciate anything you can do to convince them. Again, I agree with you, Representative Pingree. Also, my mother she's doing a great job and she doesn't need a lot of convincing, but thank you for the question.
Laura, you just mentioned the health sector in passing, but all the slides you had previously, there was no direct mention of closing of rural clinics,
Yep.
Closing of OBGYN services here and there. Is your office or any office up in Augusta looking at that? And is the health sector, the medical hospital people involved?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We honestly, during many of the years of the governor's time in office, Commissioner Jean Lambrou was, a national healthcare leader who helped write Obamacare. She was running the Department of Health and Human Services. We worked with her very closely on the Children's Cabinet and the Cabinet on Aging before she left the administration. So we sort of left health policy to Department of Health and Human Services since they had such strong expertise in this area. We kind of worked on the projects that needed cross-agency work. But I will say increasingly, exactly as you said, I mean, we're facing some pretty significant challenges in healthcare in general, and especially rural healthcare. I mean, again, this bill that I just talked about that's being debated in Washington could be catastrophic for Maine. Actually, my mom was just in a appropriations markup talking about the SNAP cuts. So this is the supplemental food assistance program that, that tens of thousands of Maine people rely on for kids and for our elderly. Very, very important food program. So our office has been advocating with DHHS to give the governor and our delegation information about exactly what these kind of SNAP cuts would mean. And based on what we know so far, it would mean $100 million hole in our state budget just to maintain the benefits as they are today. And we know that what they're trying to do in Washington is to make it more difficult for people to access these programs and to cut funds that they send to Maine. The same thing is being debated in Medicaid. Our work on the Cabinet on Aging is working sort of very closely on how do we help, especially our rural hospitals and nursing homes stay open. That system has been very, very fragile. So I would say, again, I actually worked on healthcare policy when I was in the legislature. I haven't had the opportunity to do it as much over the last 6.5 years. Again, since we had such rock star leaders in other parts of the administration. But I think to your question, it's very important to the governor. It's going to be very, very important if Washington makes any of these changes. Obviously, it would be somewhat catastrophic to a huge state like Maine. I talked about our demographics. I mean, we are a large rural state with an aging population. That just means that, again, our nursing homes are primarily funded by Medicaid. A huge change to Medicaid would be very, very difficult for us to figure out how to manage. So I'm just hopeful, again, actually going back to the delegation, I think our delegation will be united against this. So if you know anybody in any other states, especially where there are Republican senators that they might know, I mean, it's going to be a very, very important time to advocate over the next couple of weeks.
Hannah, thank you so much for being here. And since you mentioned Representative Pingree, I want to go on the record as saying that I love your mom.
Me too.
And, you know, Lewiston has suffered quite a bit of flooding during the storm of December 2023. So I appreciate your work on climate change and anything and everything that you're doing to help make our communities more resilient from natural disaster. Thank you so much for being here.
Just want to thank the mayor for his leadership. He's partnered with the state on many, many issues over the last couple of years. So appreciate that. Again, Lewiston joined the Community Resilience Partnership. You've done a great job recovering from those storms. So just want to thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much.
Susan on Zoom is saying, I admire the planning that is happening in Maine. However, with the current administration slashing environmental laws and funding for housing, how will we adjust?
It's a great question, and we get that question a lot. I will say, I mean, I'll start with climate, and this governor took office again elected in 2018. She started in 2019. For the first 2 years of our work, we were under the first Trump administration. He had pulled the U.S. out of the sort of international Paris Agreement. The U.S. was not taking action on climate, and she named our climate plan, Maine Won't Wait. We would act whether or not the federal government was with us. And so that was sort of the context in which we came in. And unfortunately, it's the context in which we will go out. Again, a lot of the Biden administration's climate policy is still in effect. It will take Congress to repeal it. So I would say we are hopeful that they won't repeal clean energy tax credits that are creating jobs all over the country, creating manufacturing jobs all over the country. We have secured a number of grants that actually they've tried to take away, and we've gone to court and been able to keep them. So I think we're doing everything we can as possible as a state to continue our leadership with or without the Trump administration. And there are programs, there are departments like Efficiency Maine that provides rebates. Most of those rebates are not coming from the federal government. Most of Maine housing's funding, so to get to the housing question, which I think we've actually tried to use some of the climate law to help us build and renovate more housing. But again, most of that funding cannot be taken away. Or if they do take it away, it's illegal because Congress authorized it, and they can't just say without an act of Congress, we're not going to give it to you anymore. So we will, I think, continue regardless of what happens. I think these are issues that are important. On the issue of housing, the federal government does most of its support of housing through low-income housing tax credits. I mean, it would be catastrophic to the entire country if Congress repealed those tax credits. I don't see that happening. And then most of the other funding for housing has come from our state. So this governor, during her last 6.5 years in office, we've invested over $300 million in building housing for our workforce, affordable housing, senior housing, home ownership options that are affordable. So we will continue to make those investments. Obviously, what Trump is doing to the budget could make our own state budget much tighter, but I would just say on the issue of housing, I think it remains one of the top priorities of the governor and the state legislature, so I think they will keep investing.
Hi, I'm Sheila and I live in Lewiston, and I lived in a house for many years and did the kinds of things that I could do to make my house more efficient. And now I live in an apartment, and I'm wondering what are some sources about things I personally can do in a little apartment unit, or what kinds of things I might encourage my landlord to take a look at.
Great. I didn't tee up that question. It's a great question. Thank you. So I shared at maine.gov/climate plan. There is a resource guides for what can businesses do, what can homeowners do, what can communities do. We're starting a new program with schools. So if you go to that, I mean, we have Efficiency Maine has been offering resources for landlords who want to install heat pumps, who want to make their buildings more energy efficient. You know, sometimes there's a disincentive for landlords to do that if they don't pay for the heat. So we've been trying to encourage them by any means necessary. There's a lot of ideas of what you can encourage your friends to do. And obviously there are things that even we can do if we don't own our own home about, you know, how do we get from here to there? Where do we buy our energy from? So hopefully there are a lot of different ideas. I will say, again, we have a lot of people who live in aging housing stock who need to tighten their homes. So if you have friends who are complaining about their electricity bills, their heating oil bills, encourage them, especially to look at the Efficiency Maine website. There are tremendous rebates. If you're on LIHEAP or you're lower moderate income, those rebates are much more significant right now. We have a special program right now helping to install this special heat pump system for mobile homes that we find to be very efficient and saving people a lot of money. So I would say there's probably not as much you can do as a renter except encourage your landlord. You can make other decisions, but there's a lot you can do to encourage other people to take advantage of the opportunities we have right now. And you can vote.
You mentioned appealing to younger people earlier. What kind of particular skill sets or experience should, say, college age or thereabouts try and develop if they're interested in government policy?
Great question. I will say I didn't even mention this, but right now our office is doing a sort of whole state government task force on AI. And I will say I'm not an expert on AI. I've been serving on this task force. I mean, the world is changing very rapidly for young people entering the workforce, whether they're coming out of college, coming out of high school. Some of the jobs will be fundamentally changed in the next, I don't know. Some people are saying it's going to be different next year. I think it's going to take more time than that. But my kids in middle school are likely going to face a very different job market than I faced when I came out of high school or college. I think just a passion and curiosity for solving problems. I think it's actually really important for young people interested in policy to engage in their community before they get too involved in it. I mean, we have housing organizations, weatherization organizations, lots of community organizations who are working sort of at a very like hands-on level with the community. And I think it's important to get that experience before you get involved in policy. In my time, again, knocking on doors, I've worked for a very small housing organization. I've done things in my community. I think those kind of experiences are actually very, very significant and important if you want to get involved in a policy realm. I will say we need a lot of expertise, though. We need smart people involved in government. Government for many years has been in place that not as many young people wanted to go. There are still lots of jobs in state government, whether it's in child protective or the Department of Environmental Protection. There are many things that young people can do if they want to get involved in state service. So I would just say, I think it's a really exciting time to be involved in things that will make a difference. I think young people are very depressed about climate. They're kind of concerned about what's happening in the world. And I think finding ways to be involved in hopeful action, especially at the local level, I think is really important right now.
Just to follow up on that, one of the ways that young people get a chance to do the kind of work you're talking about is AmeriCorps, which is pretty at risk right now. And Peace Corps is another one, but AmeriCorps is particularly near and dear to my heart. And I'm just wondering if you've got some hopeful things to say. I'm wondering if you have anything hopeful to say about this particular program.
Good question. I will say I talked about this Maine Office of Community Affairs that we're creating, and one of the programs that's going to move is the volunteer service organization that manages AmeriCorps for the state of Maine. So we've been pretty directly talking to their new leader about what's happening at the federal level. I will say the federal government has canceled a program called the Climate Corps, and they're trying to entirely eliminate AmeriCorps and VISTA programs. So we're not quite sure what's going to happen. We actually think this is going to be another area of lawsuit. Again, if Congress doesn't act to end a program, the Trump administration isn't allowed to just end it. But they're trying to do that anyway. So again, this is like a lot of other things that are going to be tied up in court. Right now, there are great people running these programs. There are AmeriCorps volunteers on the ground or employees on the ground doing work who aren't sure what's going to happen this summer. So we are trying to help them navigate a pretty stressful situation. Again, if you're not familiar with AmeriCorps, it's a service program in which people are basically paid a stipend, and they go out, mostly coming out of college or other programs, and they work on the ground. And we have Conservation Corps, we have an Ending Hunger Corps, we have a Climate Corps and a Resilience Corps. I'm sure there are a couple other programs I'm missing, but they are out doing really good work all over Maine. And it's an excellent sort of pipeline for people to get involved in municipal government and state government, in lots of issues at the local level. So, I mean, we're going to strategize. I mean, there's no way state government or philanthropy can kind of fill the hole with these kind of sudden federal changes. But we are talking to some folks even involved in philanthropy about sort of interim solutions to keep some of these things going for the next couple of years. But that's not really the right long term. So I'm in agreement with you. I think this has been the kind of program that's made a big difference. The Maine legislature has invested in these programs, so that's going to help a little bit, but it was really to kind of leverage more federal funds. So if those funds end, it's going to be challenging. So sorry, not hopeful, but we're trying.
We've got time for one more question, and I'm actually going to sort of do that. You've got it?
There, about housing costs and encouraging more construction, one of the initiatives is to try to modify zoning rules that have restricted some building. Another idea that I would propose to pitch to your office as an innovative idea would be to address building codes, elevator codes, fire codes, plumbing codes, electrical codes. And we know that they're all promulgated by private institutes nationally. They tend to be very complicated, expensive. They always err on the safe side of safety. And then there's a lot of built-in industry costs. How about Maine taking a new tack in this new federal environment and opting for ditching those codes, writing their own, tailored to Maine, that are simpler, cheaper, focus on what really works, and start fresh. And let I think the rest of the country would sit up and really be kind of like, okay, Maine's doing something.
Are you volunteering? I mean, it's not only a great idea, but it's actually an idea. So Greg Payne in our office, who leads housing policy, has talked to a group of folks who are trying to build housing and said the exact same thing. And so I would say the legislature has just assigned him kind of a study group to report back next year about how do we adjust building codes for, we passed this law allowing accessory dwelling units everywhere. So how do we make sure that people can actually build them and don't have onerous codes that are unnecessary? Elevators, some of those things. So a group's coming, and if you want to be involved, I'm happy to suggest you to Greg Payne. So great idea. Okay, good.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Hannah, for being here.
Thank you for coming.